The Indian Parliament passed the Women's Reservation Bill. Other than the fact that all of us require equal representation regardless of age, gender and other diverse factors, how can society benefit from equal rights to women, say from an economic angle? We've put together a few perspectives for you. Stay with us and you'll find this interesting. Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. The United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 gives member states a roadmap to achieve 17 sustainable goals. The United Nations has generally stated that SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals can be achieved if women are given equal rights in all public and private domains and are empowered by equal work opportunities, equitable healthcare and high quality education. The United Nations SDG 5 was created specifically to achieve gender equality and address other ills that go against women's interests. But before we get on to some optimistic news on the economic front, here is some bad news first. In a speech a year ago, the International Monetary Fund's first Deputy MD, Geeta Gopinath, said that the world will now take 130 years to close the gender gaps worldwide. Before the pandemic, that estimate was only 100 years. She said that globally, 64 million women had lost their jobs during the pandemic, which is twice as many as men, because women are more likely to work in informal, temporary, and part-time jobs, the types of jobs employers tend to cut first in a downturn. And this comes with lower pay and less social protection. And an estimated 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. Now that we've got this sobering piece of statistics out of the way, here's a look at some optimistic estimates. A study covering 44 nations in Europe and Central Asia published in the Frontiers website tells us that women's participation in parliament has a significant and positive impact on economic progress. It says that a 10 percentage point increase in women's representation in parliament leads to a 0.74 percentage point increase in GDP growth. This could be significant for a country of India's size. The IMF, on its part, says evidence from macroeconomic, sectoral, and company level data shows that women and men complement each other in the production process, creating an additional benefit from increasing women's employment on growth. And because of this complementarity, for example, if a country were to add 1 million women workers to the labor force existing in that country, it would see increased economic gains than if it were to add 1 million men workers to the labor force. Note that for a second. As a result of this increase in productivity, everybody's wages go up. Economics 101 tells us that. So it's not just men or women, it's everybody's wages. So in effect, men will benefit from higher participation of women in the labor force. Now, where exactly does India stand with regard to women's participation in the labor force? A 2022 report by the Confederation of Indian Industry tells us that at that point in time, there were 432 million women of working age in India. Out of these, 343 million were in the unorganized sector. Now, we'll have to remember that those working in the unorganized sector would have relatively fewer non-salary benefits, may face unfair working conditions, and importantly, are at risk of quick and easy job loss. The Confederation cites an estimate by the McKinsey Global Institute, which says that just by offering equal opportunities to women, India could add $770 billion to its GDP by 2025. Yet, the present contribution of women to the GDP remains at 18%. Now, we've seen an estimate for GDP increase if a country were fair to its women. But specifically, how can women benefit if they were given an equal share of rights and participation in the labor force? As far back as 2012, an article in the IMF's Finance and Development magazine noted that at that time, women comprised more than 40% of the global workforce and more than 50% of the world's university students. And that global overall productivity would increase if their talents and skills were more fully used. For example, it said, if women farmers have the same access as men to productive resources such as land and fertilizers, agricultural output in developing countries could increase by as much as 2.5% to 4%. Elimination of barriers against women in certain sectors or occupations could increase output by raising women's participation and labor productivity by as much as 25% in some countries through better allocation of their skills and talent. Also, it pointed out that greater control over household resources by women, either through their own earnings or cash transfers to them by the government, can enhance countries' growth prospects by changing spending in ways that benefit children. Evidence from countries as varied as Brazil, China, India, South Africa, and the UK shows that when women control more household income, children benefit as a result of more spending on food and education. Finally, the article pointed out that if we empower women economically, politically, and socially, it can lead to policy changes and allow our institutions to represent a range of voices. The article particularly referred to case studies in India, where it observed that giving more power to women at the local level led to a greater provision of public goods such as water and sanitation, and these things mattered more to women. And that alone, if not more, makes the case for women's representation in lawmaking, as in the example of India moving towards higher representation of women in parliament, which could potentially be critical to both growth and development. Before we wind down this episode, let's get on to our Did You Know section, which has an interesting nugget of women's participation in the labor force from a study by the Azim Premji University. It says there is a strong intergenerational effect of gender norms. The report titled State of India Working 2023 by the university says that compared to households where there is no mother-in-law present, married women living in households where the mother-in-law is present but not employed are 20 to 30% less likely to be employed. However, if the mother-in-law is employed herself, daughters-in-law are 50 to 70% more likely to be employed. And in that same line of thought, let's get on to this week's quiz question. How much do you think are women paid lesser for the same job as compared to men? There are several estimates. Give us one that you think is appropriate. And before you think it slipped our mind, here is the answer to last week's question. By how much did the performance of NVIDIA's A100 Tensor Core data center processor improve after it brought in Taiwan's TSMC's 7 nanometer process? If you had Googled for this and found a reference in the Diplomat website, you would know that the performance increased by 20 times, so that the data center, which originally required 25 racks, could be reduced to a single rack. Before we wind down this episode, we have a question for you as always, and give us your views and perspectives in the comment section below. Have you come across instances where women were treated unequally, and did you get a chance to set it right, and if so, how? If you're watching this on YouTube, do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and importantly, click on the bell icon. Till we meet again next week, have a lovely time ahead.